Hello, everyone. I'm Nathan Shedroff. I'm coming to you from San Francisco, and I'm the CEO of Seed Token, which is a bot bot-based platform built on the blockchain. And I'm coming to you today with a fairly dire warning, actually, about what we see as the potential future in the next couple years, very soon, about business in the world. Um, I'm going to backtrack really quickly and talk a little bit about the birth of the web. I was there and building some of the first big websites. And back before the web, most companies, most businesses had mediated experiences with their customers, meaning there was someone in between them and their customers that essentially owned the customer relationship. So retailers and broadcasters and many other companies essentially controlled access, and every other company in the world, every other business in the world had to deal with this mediated relationship in order to get to and talk to and do business with their customers. Unless a business could afford to build their own stores or to build what are known as brand temples, they had to play by other people's rules: grocery stores, department stores, big box stores, but also networks and broadcasters, etc. And these platforms um, set the prices very often or heavily influenced them. They controlled placement, and they owned all the data from the transactions. So essentially, they own the customer relationship. And these stores, they're Carrefour and Walmart and Target and Whole Foods and NBC and television channels, etc. What was interesting about the dawn of the web, however, is that it, for the first time, started a process of disintermediation between companies and these mediators, and allowed businesses to build direct connections to their customers. And of course, at the very beginning of the web, nobody quite knew what to do with the technology, and you saw these weird kind of experiments using these new technologies, HTML on the front end and TCP/IP on the back end. But slowly, we figured out, as businesses always do, how to use this medium and how to build a better interface for customers. And this essentially allowed companies to disintermediate middlemen to a huge degree. Obviously not the same in retail environments, but it allowed for the first time companies to go directly to their customers. And to be sure, building a sophisticated website takes investment, takes skills. We saw the need for, and then the uh, realization of lots of new publishing platforms, from content management systems to advertising networks to payment systems, et cetera, that corresponded with this explosion of new kinds of business. Um, Essentially, customers no longer had to rely on mediated channels and these other companies in order to reach their customers. So what we learned from looking at the web is that open standards, especially in this case, open standards on the front end being HTML and back end being TCP/IP, changed everything about business. And this was a really good thing. That's due to the fact that in all business relationships, certainly all customer relationships, those who own the relationship own the value, and certainly own the biggest kind of value. And this is where all businesses need to focus, because if you don't own the relationship to your user and someone else does, you don't get the best kind of value. You don't get to realize, excuse me, the most value. And when someone gets in between you and that relationship, it doesn't put your business in a position of strength. And all of this is about to change, unfortunately, and it's not in a good direction. It essentially is going to change back to the way things were pre-web, where things are re-intermediated, basically. At the dawn of the 2020s, which is coming up really quickly, just as companies have developed these direct relationships with their own customers, they're about to lose them all, and if we're not careful, lose them all for good. And this is the dire warning. And it's already happening on the web. We can see it. So the web is threatening to go back to these owned networks and platforms, whether it's Facebook Amazon, Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, even eBay, companies that are trying to do business with their customers are having to go back into a platform, basically go back into the store and play by the rules of that platform. And those platforms are uh, not necessarily doing things in the way that's healthy for their vendors. This is a great visualization and from an article on Recode about how Amazon is pushing their own vendors off the front of the page. They're inserting either paid advertisements or they're inserting their own brands. So on the web, this is happening with places like Amazon and Facebook. You can see here's a more detailed uh, view. But just like in a grocery store or department store, now companies have to pay for eye placement, pay to be seen, even in the search results. And now they're also in direct competition with the very platforms themselves and that platform's own brands. This isn't a good thing. It's not a healthy thing for business. So right at the moment where we've developed these new tools and new relationships, we have the threat that we may move back to how things were before. And at the same moment, the web is, and you all know this because you're part of the bottish community, the web is transforming into a new paradigm for digital services, and that's the conversation. And conversational interfaces are already growing at a voracious um, a voracious amount, and they are projected to far exceed the graphic user interfaces that we're used to. And we saw tremendous opportunity when GUIs came on board. They brought with them wholly new users and new uses and new kinds of opportunities. And we expect the same thing to happen with conversational interfaces. But what comes with them is a gigantic problem. That is that they are much more sophisticated and much more time consuming, as you know, to create. And we don't have the same kinds of open source tools and the same kind of sophistication of tools. So the companies that are already trying to implement these things on their side, like Bang& Olufsen, for instance, when you buy a Bang& Olufsen, which is a high-end stereo, you get the option of using Amazon's Alexa or OK Google ways to, changing the music, raising the volume or lowering it, etc., which is all great and all very sci-fi, and customers love it. But my question to you, the community, then is, if you say, "Hey Alexa" or "Okay Google," who's the relationship with now? Is it with Bang& Olufsen anymore, or is it with Google and Alexa? And I think the answer is fairly clear. It's with Google and Alexa. And so Google and Alexa have now re-intermediated themselves and put themselves in in between Bang& Olufsen and Bang& Olufsen's customers. And of course, this isn't just about stereos. It's about all products, even cars. Like in BMW, there are certain models already, and they've committed to more models where they've contracted Amazon for voice services. So you can get into some BMWs now and very many in the future and say, "Hey Alexa, when's my next oil change?" Or "Where's the next charger?" Or "Raise the temperature 3 degrees," etc. And that's all very convenient and customers will love it. But again, I ask, who owns the relationship now? Are you having a relationship with the BMW, or are you having a relationship, an extended one, with Alexa and Google? And the threat here is that as we develop these partnerships, and because there's no independent platforms for bots now, more and more every company is going to have to succumb to the demands of these bot platforms like Baidu and Tencent and Alexa and Google and Facebook in order to bring on these capabilities and these interfaces into their user experiences. And when they do, they lose the direct connection to their customers, and they lose the value that they get to create from that relationship. So think of this as BMW has now started the long, slow slide to just becoming a hardware OEM to Amazon. That's the end result that we see happening with the developments in this direction with conversational interfaces, at least until we have independent platforms that aren't competing with their own vendors. And even if BMW white labels their service and you say, hey Heidi or hey Hans instead of hey Alexa, all the data still has to be connected to Amazon servers in order to serve up the information and the experiences that people want. So who gets to see that data, who gets reports about it, what competitors get to do so, and who analyzes it still has to be opened up to essentially all of BMW's data stores in order to make these things work. We don't think that that's a very good solution. Of course, any kind of sophisticated CUI, especially a voice bot or an avatar, takes even more resources. And there's very few companies in the world who can afford to do this. I can think of, let's say, Autodesk with Ava, who has the technical resources and the financial resources to create their own conversational agent outside of the 10 or so companies like Facebook and Tencent and Amazon that can do this themselves and then offer them. And as we know, this is really powerful, especially for customers, because conversation is the first interface, has always been the first interface, and is one of the most natural interfaces. And throughout history, through literature, throughout all of our imagination about how to deal with complex systems and the developments and the technologies we create, we have envisioned conversation as the mechanism that makes most sense to control these new kinds of services, and most importantly, the relationship itself. So what's at stake here is the relationship with every customer in the world for every business in the world. We at Seed have been looking at this for about a year and a half. We're very concerned about the trajectory these technologies are taken. So, of course, we're building a network that is independent and open source so that we can be an alternative to those 10 companies, Tencent, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Baidu, etc. And we're working with others to make this happen. I'm not going to go into a great deal of conversation and description about the Seed platform because I know that in past bottish conferences, there's been talk about these things. We've had our CTO and our partners talk about this. So I'm not going to go into it. You're more than welcome to hit the Seed website at seedtoken.io to learn more. But know that the reason why we're building this and we're building it on the blockchain is because we see this dire future coming very quickly to businesses all over the world without an alternative to help them out. And we don't think most of those businesses, even the Bang & Olufsen's and the BMWs who are already jumping in, seeing that that concern because it just isn't apparent to them yet. So these are basically the companies that if we don't build an independent platform for, these are the companies that will own every customer in the world, will own every business relationship in the world, except for those few companies like Autodesk that can afford to make their own sophisticated conversational interface. So we believe that we need to create and support and use independent networks for essentially everything, whether it's finance or healthcare or media. Besides the fact that many of the networks that we use consistently now have proven themselves either insecure or untrustable, at their core, those companies are owned marketplaces. They're mediated experiences. And we think that a better approach to business is to give them or make available one that is independent and open source so that all companies can decide for themselves what kind of relationship they want for their companies, their business customers, whether it's B2C or B2B, by the way, or even B2G. Companies, businesses should be in charge and empowered to have the kinds of relationships they want. That was the promise of the web. That is, in fact, what we succeeded with the web until very recently, when these platforms arose that are now threatening to take all the chips off the table for themselves. I believe personally that we're only going to find this solution in a nonprofit owned media platform, because the way that capital is set up for profits and the way that governance is set up, it almost requires companies to build and then get sold off to these large, mega rich companies. And the worst thing that could happen is for us to build this independent marketplace and then have Facebook or Baidu come in and buy the whole thing for $1 billion, which is great for the investors, but then takes an independent platform offline, makes it a mediated platform again. So this is essentially why we're building the seed ecosystem, the seed platform. And we believe that it needs to be built now, or else it's going to be it won't be ready until it's too late to come online. So these are some of the questions that you should be asking of your clients, of the companies that engage you to build bots. Can they trust their platforms, and are they worried about the platforms like Amazon disintermediating themselves out of excuse me, out of existence, which is not a good model for partnership. Uh, do their customers know when they're talking to a bot, and what kinds of services do they envision seeing in those bots? What we see is the need for open standards that mirror HTML on the front end and TCPI on PIP on the back end in the bot world. And so we're working on some of these open standards as well. And we're hoping to have partners like you, experienced bot developers, and people who are looking towards the future join us in helping to develop these platforms. So you can go on GitHub today and look at the .flow and .bot file formats. We're open sourcing visualization tools and embedding tools that, alongside our marketplaces when they become available next year, will enable bot developers to quickly and easily serve their customers in creating these kinds of great experiences for their customers, for the businesses that employ them, outside of the Fang and Bat collection of for-profit companies that are not playing nice and trying to own essentially the world. So I wanted to end early so that I could take a lot of questions. Sorry for my coughing. I have a little cold, and truly, honestly believe that it's up to bot developers, all of us, to save business and to save business globally, because I think that the stakes are that high. We're one solution. Seed is building out one solution, and we're working together with Fetch and Ocean and several other companies to create a platform of decentralized, independent data and services and solutions to help build this alternative. Um, you may be the last line of defense for the entire concept of independent business in the world. And I hate to put it in such dire terms, but I honestly think that if we don't develop solutions that are alternatives, that's exactly where we're going to end up. And so, with that, I'll leave it to questions. Thank you very much. Let's see here.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. Yes, we have some comments and interesting questions. I would say,
I can hit
yes.
some of these. So,
Yeah.
Kumiko, you asked which sectors I think that are going to switch to seed first. I think it's going to be financial services, three: financial services, healthcare, and customer service. I think those are the large um, services that already understand the value of conversational interfaces, are already, in fact, experiencing or experimenting with these technologies. And quite frankly, they're the ones that have the money to invest in these new paradigms. Certainly while those tools are less than developed and less than ideal, and therefore more expensive and time consuming to create. We'll see everyone on board eventually. And the more that Amazon doesn't play nice on their own platform, we'll see more and more um, vendors to retailers jump ship and become interested. But I think it's healthcare, finance, and then the third is customer service.
Okay.
Dave, you asked whether you acknowledge that smart speakers are really easy these days and they're essentially free. Um, and how do we tackle? I assume you're saying how do we? You're asking how do we tackle the financial difference between paying for bot services and consumers being able to get them for free. I think there's two things. I do think that consumers don't understand the privacy implications and the data control implications. Europe is far ahead of the US and the rest of the world in developing standards for these, and I really appreciate that. But for the most part, end users don't know and they don't care. Well, they don't care because they don't know. But the companies themselves care about the data that gets generated and their ability to understand their customers. So I see those companies that serve people as the ones that are probably going to foot the bill, certainly in the short term. So it's the Autodesks and BMWs and Bang& and Olufsen's um, and marathons that are going to fund the development and pay the costs of connecting to their customers the same way they do with they're running their customer service centers and other kinds of customer outreach mechanisms. So we
Okay.
need it's going to be a while before for customers understand the imperative of this, but we should be talking right now to the companies themselves directly, and to some extent, government and NGOs that are going to care about these issues, especially in different locations. And then how can Kumiko? You asked how we can win against FAMGA, the bats and the fangs, etc. We can win by offering an independent open source solution. Wikipedia won against every encyclopedia company in the world and publisher in the world by being open source and being open and being independent. I don't think that that's a problem. We just need to get these tools up online as fast as possible and give companies and governments and NGOs an alternative, and I think that they'll take it.
Yeah, the next one I think is interesting as well from Dave. Let me show. Yes.
I think I sort of answered that. What do this change will be driven by companies or customers. I think it'll be mostly driven by companies because it's going to be a better financial solution for them. It's not going to cost as much. B, because they're going to be the ones in control. They won't be beholden to the fangs and bats. And C, um, access to the data that gets generated from that customer relationship. It won't be, filtered and mediated and therefore truncated by the bats and the fangs. So some end users will be really interested in this because they care about privacy, but mostly I think this is going to come from organizations. And then Rachel, you asked why everyone is switching to open source. I think that there's a couple reasons that are technical and a couple that are sort of strategic. I don't see everyone switching to open source, even Google and Microsoft. I see them doing sort of side projects that support open source technologies, but they still keep the keys to their kingdom pretty tightly within their grasp. I think that more and more, as companies realize they're not one of these 10, they're going to be interested in open source and independent solutions. The same way that large companies and established companies were very wary of HTML and the web and TCP/IP in the beginning. And if you were alive back then, if you remember back then, how concerned everyone was with just using a credit card online, which is nothing that people really worry about today. We're there with conversational interfaces. So I think a lot of companies are going to be interested and curious about open source. But I think once they see the deleterious effects of dealing with these mega platforms and their control, they'll get very interested in open source quickly.
Okay, and I think the last one is like it's like
It's
more a
almost
comment.
no, but I appreciate, Peter, what you're saying. Yeah, Web 2 has been hijacked, and we didn't see Web 2 turning into what it did. We thought advertising was a great independent model for funding things, and it turns out that it was the connection, it was the seed, if you will, that changed everything into a remediated environment. And I don't think anyone saw this coming, especially Amazon and Facebook and Google. I don't think that they were started envisioning that they would be in a position to own all customer relationships. But it's now in their financial best interest, especially as they compete with each other, to in fact do so. And the financial incentives are critical. The business model is critical because it leads companies to decisions that either support open, fair marketplaces or not. And unfortunately, none of these TED companies have a business model that leads them to support open marketplaces. It leads them directly instead to support owning everything as much and as fast as possible. And that's the opening for a project like ours or any kind of independent marketplace um, to flourish in and hopefully create an alternative.
Perhaps for like a closing statement before then we go to the panel. I just saw news that Google is now doing a marketplace as well. Have you seen this news as well? They're starting with a project in France.
No, I'm not surprised at all. I do know that here in the states we've had Google Play and Google Shop for years now, and I know that they just extended that to France, and they're using that as a beachhead for all of Europe. I think that's natural for them. I think it makes sense from a business standpoint, and I don't think it would be a problem if there were alternatives. But anyone
Mhm.
that plays in their playground is going to find out that they're going to get locked out, or they have to play by rules that they don't particularly like. And we'll see. I did notice today that Google said that they're shutting down Allo, which is their sort of chatbot service. I thought that came at a really interesting moment, but I think that's more about that particular solution not being as successful and not being as good a strategy to own everything as OK Google and some of the other tools that they've developed and deployed.
Okay. Yeah, so we are already finishing this session. So yeah, give us like 5 minutes time, and then we start the closing and the panel. So best you switch now to the next webinar room, and yeah, see you there. And thanks,
Yeah,
Nathan, very interesting. And thanks for your questions, by the way, as well for from the audience.
thanks.
Thanks. Bye bye.